And then
Okay,
you got it?
I got it.
All right. So
All right, take it away.
take it away.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to see that we have a bunch of people here that are interested in silk art, or they're just being really good friends and tuning in. And but either way, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about myself, and then we'll move on to the silk. Um, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland and did a lot of sailing. But so water and nature and weather all pretty much inform my work, that pretty much everything that I do. In 2003, we moved from Maryland to the western Maine mountains. And even though I'm inland, I'm still near water, but I have the added bonus of mountains and forests around, which is pretty nice. And I'm going to start, I'm going to share my screen here so that I can get to my my presentation. And I'll show you, this is what home looks like to me. A lot of people think that when I say I moved to Maine, that this is what they think of, but really for about 4 months out of the year, it looks like this. That's what we had today. So, and that's a silk painting of mine. But I'm interpreting the land around me. Anyway, so I'm just going to leave that here while I talk, and you can enjoy that. My first painting of fabric was at Maryland Institute College of Art, where I went to graduated with a BFA. And I did the last year I was there, I did a fabric painting. This is before fabric paints were even available, even invented. And I was using Winsor Newton alcohol-based inks. And I made a little piece and hand stitched it, and kind of thought that was pretty cool. It was different. I was not necessarily a painter. I had done a lot of work in sculpting and printmaking and so forth, and photography, but I didn't think painting was my thing. But nevertheless, I painted on fabric and thought that was pretty cool. So I continued to do that for a couple of years, and I worked and ended up doing a lot of wall hangings. I worked with an interior designer in Baltimore, actually. I was replicating rug patterns from the Middle East and doing wall hangings to match rug patterns, which was pretty complex. And then I was admiring Victoria's hand quilting one time when we were together, and I thought to myself, I thought out loud, actually, not to myself. I said, this is way too complex. I couldn't possibly do this. Too many fussy little stitches and takes too long. And she said, oh, no, you would be great at this. You're an artist. You should try it. Okay, so there's a challenge thrown down. So I couldn't ignore that. So I went about creating a pattern with a lot of brown paper and a T-square on my living room floor. And when I went to the fabric store, I realized that you could actually buy patterns, that I didn't have to do all that work on the living room floor. And but the fact is, the reason why I tell you this is that I don't think I ever bought but one pattern ever in my quilt time. I ended up doing art quilts and not using any patterns at all, and creating my own stuff and learning the hard way. I did have a lot of quilt buddies that helped me along the way, and throughout my silk career too. I have gotten help from other people, but I generally just kind of bust through it by myself, and that's how I learned, trial and error. So so fast forward to after a decade or so of making art quilts, it was 1996 that a friend of mine, another creative friend of mine, asked me to go with her to a silk painting workshop, a 2-day workshop in Alexandria, Virginia. And at the time I had kids, and I thought, wow, a weekend away was pretty tempting anyway, but silk painting was fabulous. And I'd never done it, never heard of it. So yeah, I'll go. And after that, I was absolutely smitten, and I thought, wow, this is something that I would like to share with people. So I bought enough materials to teach a class. And at the time where I lived on Kent Island on the Eastern Shore, things were booming. The population was booming. Art classes were abounding. And I thought this would be an easy sell. So, but life took a turn, and things happened and I never did get to teach the class, but I kept all the materials, and things froze and thawed in my garage up here in Maine. The silks were smushed into a trash bag and all wrinkled. But in 2014, I finally had the opportunity and the wherewithal to dip back into it and see if it was something that I was really, really in love with.
It's just at 7, so.
Whoops, somebody's not muted. That's okay. Just check your mute button. So I jumped back into it, and I actually called the manufacturer of the dyes because I was worried about them. And they said, well, if they didn't smell bad, they should still be viable. And sure enough, they were. And I haven't looked back since, and I just kept on going. I did buy new materials. So I haven't been using the same old dyes that have been frozen. So I will, I'm going to move on with pictures here and show you. This is a picture of my lowly little studio in the basement and with an unfinished room. As you can see, the drywall tape lines. It's a good thing they didn't paint it, because there's dye splattered all over the walls and push pin holes and all sorts of crazy things. But and this is taken with a panoramic shot, so that's why things are a little tilted and weird and warped. I don't have a vaulted ceiling or tables that are going to drop things on the floor. So on the left-hand side over here, you can see my dye table with various different materials. And then working around the room, I've got a frame on this table, a frame on that table. And note the big roll of newsprint up on the wall in the far right corner. That's an integral part of silk painting, because they are wrapped in newsprint to steam to set the dyes. And I'll briefly go over that in another slide. And so that's my little workroom. That's where the magic happens. And that's a picture of my dye table in process. I use ice cube trays for my palettes for the most part, or for my mixing trays, I should say. I use a test piece of silk for a palette for testing colors and so forth. Here's another closer view of a very messy palette. But I mix up, oftentimes I mix up more dye than I need. So I save them in these little containers and label them for future use. And because I do repeat designs, these aren't printed, these are all done one of a kind, hand done one of a kind. So I'll save, I have Maine sky or Maine water or lobster color, things like that I save for various different, when I'm doing another one. And the dyes stay viable. They don't, if they dry up, I can just add dilutant to them and they're good to go again. So I rarely waste a drop of dye, which is nice. So the various techniques I use are these. I use a resist technique, which is probably one of the most common ones that you would find around the world. And it is just as it says, you use a gluey substance to create a design, and that dries and it holds the dye in that space so that the dye doesn't bleed onto the silk. And the same with the batik, only the resist is a soy wax that's washable and it's non-toxic, which is a wonderful substance. And it's so, you can get such a variety of looks with, whatever conveyance you use to put it on the wax. So you can get very detailed, or you can get big, bold brush strokes. It's a fun medium to work with. Whereas the resist is generally a finer line, kind of gives you the, like a stained glass effect. And then salt, whoops, hold on, I lost you there. Yeah, where is my screen going? There we go. Sorry. The salt method, which is just applying, which if you are a watercolorist, you may be familiar with this. Salt moves the dye or the paint, whatever, around on the surface and creates some fabulous abstract effects, which is very fun. It's a little nerve-wracking because you don't know what's going to happen. You walk away from it and come back 2 hours later and it's completely different, but it's a lot of fun. Free flow is just what it says. I don't use any resist. Your control is basically with the amount of dye you have on your brush. So you can flood the silk with a lot of dye, or you can make little dot marks with a very controlled amount of dye on the brush. And snow dye, obviously, I only do in the winter. It's very similar to an ice dye technique that a lot of people use in the dye world. But I choose to just do it in the winter when I have snow available. It just makes it a little bit more exotic sounding, and gives similar results to ice dyeing. Probably a little softer actually than ice dyeing, because ice dyeing generally uses a powdered dye, which is really intense and concentrated. And what I'm using does give a softer effect. I have some examples of it. And shibori, if you've ever done any, I know the quilters in the group know what shibori is, but it's a Japanese technique of folding or stitching fabric to create a pattern. My shibori is way simple. I don't do anything complicated, but I have blocks cut to sizes and circles cut to sizes that my wonderful shop technician, also known as Tom, my husband, has made for me that I can use. So I don't get very, and I do a twist and scrunch method that I guess you could call shibori as well. And the last method I use is, I call it painterly. But the method I use is by a particular artist, silk artist, who's world famous, well-known. Her name is Karen Sistek, and she has a proprietary system that she uses. And I've been lucky enough to work with her 2 times. I've gone to her studio in the Pacific Northwest and worked with her. And it's such a blast. It's painterly, gives a completely different effect from the scarves. It's a whole different world. So I'm gonna start your journey here with the resist method. Here you see a plain white silk scarf stretched on a frame. As you saw in the beginning on my studio, I had some silk stretched on frames. I do buy pre-hemmed silk scarves. I am not gonna spend my time hemming scarves because I'd much rather spend time dyeing scarves than sewing. And so I buy them pre-hemmed. It saves a lot of time. The size I generally use is 14 by 72. So that's, although my frames are expandable and adjustable, but I generally have them set up for the 14 by 72. And here, these crazy blue marks on here that look like nothing but scribble are my rough sketch of a scarf that you'll see later. It was nasturtiums. But this is a water-soluble pen that I use to get a rough idea of placement and where I'm going with the design. As I said, there are very few designs that I use any kind of stencil for or tracing. Most of it is freehand. And so, so that's my crazy idea for nasturtiums right there. And when I put the resist on that scarf, that's the resist line is going to be white. When I put it on this scarf, the yellow one, the resist line is going to stay the color of the background. So actually it's going to disappear on this one in particular because I only have dye on one side of the resist. This I call a scrunch dye. And it's funny, until I put all these slides together, I didn't realize how often I do this, but I do pre-dye the backgrounds quite a lot. I think it gives a nice texture, visual texture to the scarf. It just adds another dimension to it, which I think is kind of fun. And these are my applicator tools, just little squeeze bottles and a squeeze bulb. This blue one here is actually a tool that's used in the ceramic industry for applying slip glazes. But each of these has tips, different size tips that you can use for a finer line or a thicker line. And you can dye the resist. I have black resist dye in this little bottle here. And that is, a lot of people use a lot of different colors of resist. I have not, excuse me, I have not experimented with colors a whole lot. So generally it's black or clear for me so far. So here you can see on that yellow scarf, I did have, you'll see the blue lines where I did a rough sketch of my ginkgo leaves. That is my design. And then my lines, the actual resist lines. And as you can see, I don't exactly follow the lines all the time, but that's part of my artistic license, right? So, so this resist has to be dry and heat set in order for it to really hold the line, as we say, so that the dye does not bleed through it. and wreck the design. So as I said, because I'm only putting dye on one side of this line, the line's going to disappear when I wash it out, and you won't be able to see it. It'll just look like I painted these ginkgo leaves on the silk by themselves. And here's a picture of clear resist on white, and that line will remain white when it's when the dye is applied. And here's some black resist on plain white silk, ready for dye. My Maine lobster love scarf. And this one I do use I have a drawing that I trace on this one because heaven forbid I would get a anatomically incorrect lobster. That would not be a good thing living here in Maine. And these are my tools for applying the dye. As you can see, some are more well used than others. But the small, broken little sad looking brush on the right hand side is my very favorite brush for doing small spaces, because you just need the tiniest little drop of dye because it expands and spreads so fast. And the sponge brush I use for larger areas like backgrounds where I have to apply the dye rather quickly before it dries. It's like painting a wall. You don't want to have a dry edge. You need to keep a wet edge to avoid a dye line. Now, in the free flow method, there's sometimes I want a dye line. So, but generally, if you're doing a large space in one color, you don't want a line. And here, excuse me, here are the ginkgos ready to steam. And remember the newsprint roll that we saw in the back corner. Here it's put to use. The scarves are laid out on the newsprint and rolled up around a tube. And I can get about 8 to 10 scarves in a batch for steaming. And I try to do that because the steam time is 3 hours on 2 burners of the stove. So that takes up a fair amount of energy. So I try to conserve where I can, and I'm not steaming them one at a time. So those are ready to steam there. And here's my steamer. Now, this photograph is really confusing, I understand. If you tilt your head a little to the right, you'll see that it's my, everybody's done this. Follow my pointer here. This box is my steamer box. And back here is the lid. It's hinged with this big piano hinge. And it's a big stainless steel box. It has a baffle in the bottom to keep the water from splashing up onto my newsprint roll, because until the dyes are steamed, they're still considered active, which means they can be changed and literally ruined if water gets on them. So you have to have that baffle. And so I'll close the lid on that. I tape it shut with duct tape, the real metal duct tape. I leave one little spot open in the back so the steam can escape, and set that on the stove, and that cooks for 3 hours and sets the dye. And the dye actually becomes molecularly bonded to the silk so that it becomes a permanent dye and doesn't wash out. And that's just a close-up of the little bracket where the pipe sits, and here's your roll of silk. So here are some examples of that resist method and some of the scarves that I've done. This is a very popular one. It's the Maine coastal scene. And here you can see the blue, excuse me, the blue of the sea and the blue of the sky are all done. That's where I use that foam brush and get it on fast and don't let it dry. Now, the trees have several greens blended inside that area. I'll do a close up here. So you can see I've applied a couple of different dyes here, and that's wet on wet, and that blends with a soft edge. But here, under the trees, or here on the rocks, you can see where that dry edge creates a line, and that's applying wet dye over dry dye, and it pushes the dye into a line and gives it a texture. So that's part of the free flow lesson. And let's see, I need to move down here. All righty, the same theme I did actually for a commission as a wall hanging that the customer wanted to hang in a window. She's a counselor, and she wanted light from the window, but she wanted some privacy and requested that main scene. And here's a really good example actually of that dry line here um, along these rock edges, and then the blending in the trees. Let's see. And continuing on the main theme, there's some lobsters. And this combines techniques, actually. There's salt technique on that blue background. You can see what the salt moves the dye around. And then the little spots, little freckles on the lobster, you can see I've done one whole color on the lobster, and then I go back in with my favorite little tiny brush that's broken and dot it with a darker color and create the little texture, freckle texture on the lobsters. And here's another pre-dye. So I pre-dyed this whole scarf in that lovely sort of orange sherbet color. And so the lines on the monarch butterfly would not show up as stark white, and at that time I didn't have black resist. And so I was only working with a clear resist. So I knew if I colored the background, the resist lines would disappear. So that was kind of fun with that one. And that's back to the nasturtium that we saw with the messy sketch on it with the watercolor or the water soluble pen. When I first started, I got a pen that I didn't read the label on it right, and it was not water soluble, but it was a disappearing pen. It disappears in 24 hours, and I didn't realize that. So I'd done this really complex design on a silk, and it was the end of the day. I walked away. I was going to come back and do it the next day, and I came back, and the design was gone. I was like, "Oh, this isn't working. I need a new pen." So read the fine print. This is probably the most complex resist piece that I've done. This was a commission for a gentleman actually who had the funniest request. He was like, "I wear bold colored ties and I've always been known for them. I need a bold color scarf, and it's got to be antlered animals because I love antlered animals." So this was a challenge. So I put this together, and this is a fun example of how the dyes mix themselves on the silk. And I didn't have to mix all of these separate colors because they mix themselves. So this purple mousse here, okay, I painted the whole thing purple. And then the blue mousse, I painted it this color blue. But when I went over to the purple, it changed colors and created a new color blue. So all of these overlaps are just the dyes creating their own different colors when they overlap. And this is this is what I had to trace. It was mind-boggling. I had to step back a lot and look at it because I'd get mixed up. It's like, what animal am I on? Where am I in this design? So that was a challenge. But I ended up doing it again for cetaceous creatures for another commission special request. And that I think actually that person decided not to wear this, and they ended up buying a scarf hanger and hanging it on their wall, which I was flattered. So that was fun. And the last scarf I have to show was kind of a fun project. I met this author who she's written children's books and adult books. She was vacationing here in Rangeley, and we got to talking, and she asked if I could take her illustrators' images from the book covers and put them on a scarf. And so I did. And so here we have Cat in the City and Mutt's Promise done in two different techniques on one scarf. So as you can see, Cat in the City has the resist technique because that's what the book cover was. And so I could use that. And then here on Mutt's Promise was a painterly technique because that's what she did on her book cover. So that was an interesting challenge. But it worked out quite well, and they were pleased, and they actually wore the scarves when they went to their book signing events at bookstores, and that was kind of cool. So that's the resist method for you. We're going to move on to the wax, the batik. And really, I say batik. For all you quilters out there, you're going to laugh because it's not a Hoffman Fabrics batik that I'm doing. I'm doing very simple bold geometric designs that are nothing like Hoffman fabrics, but for lack of a better term, it's batik. So that's my lowly little wax pot that's soon to be upgraded. I'm excited about that. So here's an example of when I fully color the scarf. Again, I wanted kind of a kaleidoscope effect. So I put color all over the scarf. I had my fall palette that I knew I wanted. So it's random colors on the silk. And then I added a design with my wax, with a standard paintbrush, similar to the ones that I used to put the dye on the silk. And again, no pattern. This is just me following my paintbrush around on the silk and making swirls and circles and doing what needed to be done. And then I over dyed it with a contrasting color. It's generally a darker color so that it does contrast, and got this kind of jewel tone effect. And here's the final product, which is kind of a fun, I think I called it something like Autumn Kaleidoscope. I do like to title all my scarves. They all have titles. They all have little stories with them. So, and here's another one with a pre-dyed background. And I don't have to start with a pre-dyed background. I've got some that, I start with white, but the roses in particular, I didn't want any white in there. So start with the outside petals being the faded ones that are going to fall off. So that goes on first. And then the upper right-hand corner, I put a darker layer, more wax. And then the final rose color is darker even with more wax in there. And then overall, then I do a gray background on this to make the roses pop. And I'm sorry I don't have a final picture on that one, but it's mighty pretty. I think it's on my website. I'm sure it is. That's one that's going to the botanical gardens. And this one you can see I did start with white, putting down some bold geometric shapes to begin with, and then putting more color down on the silk and going over those colors with the brush. And here I'm using like a 1-inch chip brush to get the wax on there and making these bold shapes. And just again, layering the wax, the color, and then the darker color is the last one to go. This one is a pre-dye. Let me see, here we go. The lighter color was pre-dyed all over the scarf. That was a 2-color scrunch actually, with a sort of looking for a tropical watercolor. And this is probably tropical sandbar, I think. The little ripples in the sand that in the beach. That was what I was going for. And then I put down a darker color for the water, and I did not like, it was plain, too plain. So I went back into it with some, I'm not sure whether it was alcohol or water, but either one gives a similar effect to add some texture to the silk, a visual texture. We're not talking, touching texture, because the silks are beautifully soft and wonderful, but that gives it visual texture. And then the last batik one I have here are some dahlias. And actually I have to study this slide the next few days because I have an order for 3 of these that are going to the botanical gardens also. And this I did a long time ago. I am not very good about taking notes, I must admit. So, but I do take a lot of pictures. So I use that as my reference, and I have to go back in here and think about this a bit and see what I did so that I can recreate it, but don't tell them. So next is the salt method, or the salt technique, which I just love. It's so unpredictable, but it always gives fabulous results. And I have come upon a method that gives it extra 3D, and it's by layering the dyes with a darker color, and still, I mean, believe it or not, this whole silk was covered in black dye first. Then I added color on top, and then I add the salt and walk away. And when I come back after it's dried, the salt has moved the dyes around and actually like almost uncovering the color, and moving the black dye out of the way so that you can see the color, because it looks just like a wet black mess when you walk away from it. So it doesn't look anything like this. So it's pretty amazing. So here's a little close up. You can even see the weave of the silk in this one. And here you can see I put the dye in circles. You can do it, you can apply the dye however you want. But it ends up giving, if it's stripes or whatever. But I call these my mermaid scarves because I think they look like sea anemones. But it gives this wonderful 3D effect that all kinds of fabulous things happen in there. It's wonderful. So that's the salt effect. The next one is the free flow method. And we talked a little bit about that in the lobsters, where I put the little tiny dots on the lobster for the freckled effect on their shells. And this is just a bigger example of this. This is just a lot of dots on the silk. So every dot you see here, and layers of them, are one touch of the paintbrush on the silk. And that gives a pretty fun effect. And so that's that dry dye edge, dropping wet dye onto dry dye and letting it create its own little
like quarter day tomorrow.
Spot there.
Just going in to check in.
And here's an example. I call this surf zone, and it's just multiple applications of lines of dye and letting them dry and coming back and adding more and more. And on this one, I did use a sponge to apply some wax first, so it sort of imitates the froth in the water on the beach. And that actually started as a scarf design, and I did those wall hangings for a gallery. So, and this one I think is not quite finished, but that's the free flow method. And it's kind of fun too, because as you can see in the lower right-hand corner, the dyes tend to separate. Not all dyes are pure colors. So when they dry, they'll separate out into their native colors and surprise you sometimes with different colors that you didn't think were in there. This is a sort of an abstract landscape that I've done. I probably put the color down for the sky and the water first, and then the next line would have been the back mountain ridge, and then moving forward so that I can continue to see. Because if I went the other way, it'd be all backwards. So you start in the back, and then you can cover up your bottom dye line. And that's a landscape that I have done. Done a bunch of those. I like that. It's kind of fun. So here's my snow dye. And like I said, it gives a little bit of a softer edge. This is a great big piece of charmeuse satin silk. It's a big 90-inch shawl. And it came out with some wild and crazy pieces. I mean, bright in the middle and then faded off on the edges. But this is what it looks like when it's dyeing. So what I've done is I've taken the scarf and I probably wet it. I twisted it into a rope and coiled it and put it on the drain, the little rack over a dishpan, and then dropped the dye on top of this, and I pile snow on top. Just go out the back door and get a bucket of snow. We have plenty. And then drop the dye on the snow and walk away and come back the next day when it's all melted and sort of half dry, and hang it up and dry it. And that's what you have, which is kind of fun. And see, these colors, I did not drop that dye color on there. That separated out from another dye. So that was a surprise. I wasn't expecting that, but still pretty. And then our next to last method is shibori, which also gives some surprising, at least for me, surprising results. I know that when you're really doing tight stuff with shibori, there shouldn't be any surprises. But this is my simplified method. I fold this, that was a big 44-inch square scarf that you saw there. Fold it up, and I'm using my 4-inch squares of plywood to clamp it with these great big heavy duty clamps that are almost impossible to open. And then drop, let's see, wait a minute. I did pre-dye this one. So when I folded this up, it was pink. I had pre-dyed the whole thing pale pink, because you can see see this pale pink color right here. And then folded it up and clamped it, and then applied the blue dye on 2 sides and the purple dye on 2 sides. And that's what came out. So that's my simple, very simple shibori. And here's another example of a non-pre-dyed scarf. The red and black was just a white scarf and folded and done the exact same thing with the previous one, just dye on 2 sides, same color. And the one on the right is wrapped around, you can see a PVC pole up here. This is scrunched, rolled, and wrapped with rubber bands around a PVC pipe. And then the dye is applied and it comes out like that. And this last one is a similar thing, but it's wrapped a little differently. Here I've taken the same thing, the 44-inch scarf, and wrapped it into a coil like a rope, and then wound it around a PVC pipe, and then dropped dye on it and let it sit overnight, and it comes out like this. And the crinkles stay in it. I steam it with the crinkles in it, and that I call my activity scarf. I didn't wear it tonight because it's actually warm tonight in here, but I wear one every single day in the winter, and I wear it all day, whether I'm inside or outside. I love it. The crinkles give it volume and keep the warm air in, and I've always been a scarf person anyway. I've actually transitioned from turtlenecks to scarves. I don't even have a turtleneck anymore, but I wear scarves. And this one is just fabulous, even in the below zero weather. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I'm very happy to have been able to market those this winter as activity scarves. And Carla will vouch for that. She has one that she wears snowmobiling. So, and she's selling them out there on the trails. So the last method I have is one that I'm particularly proud of, and that's the painterly method. And I mentioned the woman, Karen Sistek, who is an international, she's a master silk painter. And her workshop is in Port Angeles, Washington. And as I said, I've been lucky enough to take a couple of workshops with her. They're 5-day workshops that are just fabulous because they're immersive. She has enough rooms in her house that we stay in her house, and she doesn't have that many people in the workshop. Her husband cooks all the meals. So all we have to do is paint and paint and paint and learn and paint. And it's just phenomenal. So for 5 days, that's what we do. And this was my first workshop. I'm kind of proud there. This is Perky the Kingfisher. And he actually gets a lot brighter after he's steamed. That's one thing with the steaming of the dyes, it really makes them pop, and the colors do get brighter. So you can see this is a different method of attaching the silk. I know it's not a clipped frame. This is masking tape with pins on the silk, and the masking tape is key because when the silk gets wet, it starts to sag, and so you can lift up the tabs of the masking tape and stretch it a little tighter, so you can always keep tension on the silk, which is key to making sure that the dyes move properly. And Karen always mounts her silks on finished canvases, and her husband also makes those for us too. So if I wanted to try that because that wasn't what I had intended on doing with my paintings, but she did, and so I thought I would at least try it. It makes them weatherproof, which is wonderful. I could hang it outside if I wanted to, but I've chosen not to use that method as far as my wall art is concerned. I do frame my pieces, or they're free-flowing and wall hangings. So when I got home, I started doing a lot of, I think it was 2 winters that I was able to do quite a bit of painting, and this is some Maine blueberries in process. Again, you can see the attachment method. I'll zoom in here so that you can see that. And she's got this, Karen had it all figured out. It's wonderful. This pinning and taping method, which is just great. So I've got my design on the silk, and the silk is what makes this painterly is that there's no resist, of course. The silk is treated with a spray starch, and that starch helps keep the dye from moving around. So basically, when this with this method, you're using a very dry brush and literally scrubbing the dye into the silk. And that's her motto, is inch and scrub, inch and scrub. So you just use a very dry brush and scrub it along. And it's a magical thing to see how paintings develop with this technique. But there's the finished product on the blueberries. And that painting is about, I don't know, maybe 16 by 20, something like that, 22. Not terribly big. Here's a detail of it. My favorite part are these little water drops. That just sets me off. I love it. And moving along to some other projects that I've done. The puffins, which is an iconic Maine coastal bird. This title is The Secret, for obvious reasons. I think they're trading secrets about where the best sardines are, something like that. And here's a little detail of his feet clinging to the rocks. And I have a bird's nest. And these are all done from photographs. I do use photographs as reference. There's really only one painting in here that I can think of that I did not use a photograph. I used some artwork that I found on the internet, but the rest of it, I'll explain it when I get to it. But for most of these, I have used photographs. This is actually a green heron, even though it's blue. I don't know why people name birds the things they do, but this was from a photograph by a local Maine photographer named Carl Ramsdell, and he does spectacular work. I have never seen anybody get the point of view that he does for his stuff. I mean, I don't know, like where he's sitting or standing, or he must have a lens that's 100 miles long, but it's amazing. And he was just starting out his photographic journey when I saw this picture, and he was just like, sure, paint it, whatever, just give me credit. So I was lucky enough to have one of his pictures to paint from. This is a bigger painting, actually. I call this one Nature's Way, which, everybody's got to eat. And some people may find it gross and disturbing, but it is nature's way. This is from a photograph done on the coast of Maine, and the place is called Duck Trap Harbor. If you like smoked salmon, you may have heard of duck trap salmon. That's where this is from. And another Instagram friend of mine allowed me to use her photograph for a reference. And this is the one that isn't from a photograph. The central piece with the banner and the fisherman was from some artwork that I came upon just by chance on the internet. I have changed it enough that I don't think I'm going to get it. I could not find the original artist. I searched and searched. And so like I said, I changed enough. I don't think I'll get into copyright trouble. But I don't think he had a pipe. And I know there wasn't a lobster boat in the background. And I did change the wording a little bit. And then I added the chart and all the accoutrements on the bottom, showing what a fisherman's life includes. And here's some detail shots of that. But he's looking out there, checking the weather to see if he's going to go out, or if the weather's going to get worse, because he's already got his sou'wester on. And I'll tell you that my favorite part of this is the coffee stain on the chart. I love it. Just my crazy little sense of humor. But that was one that was not from a photograph. Oh, you know what? I have two that are not from photographs. This next one is not either. This was a commission for a young man by his young lady friend. I think they're now married. But she contacted me and she wanted a scarf for him because he's an outdoor person. And this is sort of where like the activity scarf maybe even got its start. They live and work in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and he's a fly fishing guide, a ski instructor, their passion is mountain biking and just all things outdoors. And so I wanted to include the Wyoming symbol logo of the bucking bronco, and the fish for the fly fishing, and the Snake River that's snaking through here that goes past Jackson Hole, and the Grand Tetons. This was a big project. This is a 44-inch scarf square, and it's a stretchy material. It's a crepe de chine, which was really stretchy. So it was. I mean, I know I didn't start with the silk that close to the edge, but it ended up getting pretty stretched out. But here's a detail of one of the fish and the flies that it's after. And then this is the funny part. She asked me to have these symbols put on the scarf to show that it was from Greta to, with love to S, whatever his name is, with a bike and a pair of skis and a fly fishing pole and their dog footprint. And so that's how it was signed for him for his gift, which is kind of fun. I try to accommodate all my commissions. This was a sweet little commission. It was actually a compilation of a couple of different photographs, and I came up with the birds and the framing part, but the sunrise and the mountainscape were all particular to this client's request. And this put my sewing skills to test too, because I had to I sewed the backing piece on it, so it's like a pillowcase, and then had to include these tabs as well and make sure the tabs were all even, and that was a challenge, but I got it done. And here's a little detail of this was one of my favorite parts, this little piece of twine that hooks the birch branches together, and then this little tiny birch branch with the chickadee on it. And the chickadee is the main state bird. And here's one that was ultimately from a photograph, but it's like third stage in. On the right, what you're looking at is a silkscreen that I did in college of a photograph that I took when I was 14 in the Florida Keys. And Anne will know where this was. This was at Aunt Carol's house when I was 14 on a visit down there. And I love that photograph, and I love this crazy tree. And so I did a silk screen of it, and it's hung in my house forever since. And I thought it would be a fun thing to translate. So I made it into a silk painting. And that's what you see on the left-hand side is my translation of that ancient and literally antique silk screen of palm trees. And I do love flowers so much. I want to do some more flowers. These are some orchids that my daughter had, and when I was visiting her, I took a bunch of pictures. And these are Megan's orchids. And my other daughter actually has this in her ownership, which is kind of fun to know that it's staying in the family. And my last visit to Karen Sistek's studio, I did a big painting, and I was able to choose my own subject matter since I wasn't a beginner anymore. So I found a pattern of hers that I fell in love with, and I was able to do that. This is a water lily and a dragonfly, and I'll show you a better picture of it. But this was, I remember this moment so vividly. It was the next to last day. We had to fit, it was 5 o'clock. Dinner was being ready, wine was being poured. It was, hurry up. We've got to get these finished and into the steamer. And so I remember quickly just putting, I had a lot of dye mixed, and I didn't want the background detailed. I wanted kind of out of focus. So I was putting on that dye as fast as I could. And I guess ready for that glass of wine after 4 days of 8 or 9 hours of painting a day. But this was the finished project. And I love that. There's if you can see, there's a little goldfish, not a goldfish. What do they call them? It's not a carp. Anyway, they're not allowed in Maine because it's not a native species, but I love them. A koi, that's what it is. Under the water lily here on the right-hand side. There's lots of texture here, and on the I'm going to zoom in on the little dragonfly because his face is awful cute. And it's fun to see the translucence of the wings. Was a tricky little business with the silk, but you can see that there's some water spots on the lily pads and shadows of the petals, and there's the little koi guy hiding under there. So that was my last workshop with Karen, and I do hope someday I'll be able to go out and work with her again. It would be delightful. And my latest work is, whoops, this commission, and I hope Ellen is on here with us. She commissioned me to do an elephant family, and this is representative of her and her 3 children. She just adores elephants, and I enjoyed the challenge. I've never painted an elephant before. So, and there were particular colors requested or colorways. So I worked with that and came up with this. This is big. This is about 44 inches by 22 inches and hangs freely from the top. There's no frame on it or anything. And that was just completed recently. So that brings you up to date. But here's something I saved for the last bit. Remember I said in college, I painted a piece of fabric and hand stitched it. So I just wanted to show you where I've come from. That's about 12 inches circle. And that's my painting with the stitching, which seems really crude and elementary right now, but I wanted you to see where I came from. And so from there to there, I think I've made some progress. Anyway, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen now. And if you guys have questions and wanna talk, unmute yourself and raise your hand and jump in there with some questions. I'll be glad to answer them.
I want you to tell the story about the lobster woman.
Oh,
The lobster woman.
yeah. This is kind of fun. I met somebody on Instagram, and she is a young woman. I guess she's 30 years old, has a young family. She is a full-time lobster fisherman in Down East Maine, and she's also competing for Mrs. Maine. She's already Mrs. Washington County, I think, and which is way down East County. And I looked at her and I thought, you know, what gumption to be a full-time lobster fisherman, person, and having a family and doing this amazing thing of being Mrs. Maine. And so I contacted her and I said, I would like to make you a scarf, a lobster scarf, so that you can, you know, show off what you do. And she was floored and thought how wonderful that was. And I didn't think it was such a floored thing. I was just like, this just has to be, it just is. And so, so I've done that and I've sent it off to her and she was tickled to death. So her competition is coming up in April. And I'm curious to see how she uses it. And you know, I just said, just give me some recognition. I don't pay me anything. I don't want any money. Just mention my name or, you know, give me credit if they're pictures or whatever. So I'm looking forward to that. That's kind of fun. So spread my work down east. Anybody else have any questions? Hi, Lindsay.
Lindsay or Jane?
Carol, how long
Jane,
does it
go-
take you? How long does it take you to do, say, like the elephant one?
Oh, gosh. You know, I don't keep track of time on anything that I do. Like I said, I don't take notes, and that's part of my bad. But because there are so many different processes to it, it's not like I sit down for 2 days and work just on that, because things have to dry, things have to, you know, there are so many different processes. I move from one project to another. But I'll tell you the processes of that, where I spent probably 2 hours researching elephant photographs, and then back and forth with the client to agree of what sort of setup she liked or composition. And so then I made up a composition of my own. And I projected the images on the wall to the right size so that I could trace them. And then I took that material and put it under the silk and traced it on the silk. And then putting the resist on, and then painting, mixing the dyes and painting it. And then steaming it and sewing it. I really don't know. And I found when I was the piece of silk that I had, I hadn't left enough room for the sky so that I could turn it and make a sleeve for hanging, because it hangs on a rod. So I actually took another strip of silk and dyed it that sky color and sewed it on, so I wasn't, working into that sky and taking more of it away to create the hanging sleeve. So, and it's always, sewing is always nerve-wracking because you've spent this much time, and as a quilter, I mean, you're putting it all together, but silk, if it snags or something, that's it. So, I mean, it's ruined. But luckily, I have a trusty sewing machine, and I do, pray and was like, okay, let's get this done. Let's get it done. It can work. And it came out all right. So I was very pleased with it. But it's hours. I mean, some scarves, like the salt ones, don't take, but actual work time on the scarf. I mean, okay, I press it, I get it on the frame, and then getting the dye on it and the salt is literally 10 or 15 minutes. But then, then it works for 2 hours and dries, and then it has to be steamed and processed and so forth. So, so each one is all very different. Yeah. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jane, does that help answer your question? Yeah.
Answer was like, I don't know.
No, I say the same thing when somebody asks me how long it takes to custom quilt a quilt. I mean, I do heavy quilting, so I don't know. I don't keep track of my hours. I don't want to have to keep track of my hours. So I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yep.
good.
Yep.
Carol?
Yeah.
Could you talk about the different silks that you use, please?
Yes.
You mentioned a few different ones. Would you talk about them a little bit, please?
I did. For the most part, I use, there's a term in silk terminology that's called mummy, which is the thickness of the silk. And honestly, I don't even know how it's spelled. But it's MM is its designation. So what I use for the most part for scarves like this, like what I'm wearing and what I work on most, is 8 mummy. And it's a very light, it's also called a China silk. It's just a flat weave. It's nothing, there's no design in it or anything. I also use a charmeuse, which is a satin. And that's a 12 mummy. It's a little heavier and warmer, and it has a shiny side and a flat side. That snow dye piece that I showed, the big shawl, the 90-inch shawl, that was a charmeuse and a beautiful piece. And for the I use a 16 mummy silk, and it has and like for the wall hanging, the elephant wall hanging, it's a bit sturdier. It's not something you would wear as a scarf. You would make clothing out of it perhaps, but it stands up well to framing or the wall hanging, and drapes nicely for the wall hanging. I have some Dupioni silk. I have a bolt of that is, it's a beautiful sheen. I love it. I have not made scarves out of it because I'd have to hand hem it. I generally dye it, pieces of it, and make scrunchies out of it. But I haven't, I'd like to save enough to do some clothing and dye a big piece, because it's a beautiful, it's got a little bit of a natural slub to it and a sheen to it that's really pretty. Occasionally I will get what's known as a flat crepe de chine, and that is the softest of the softest silks. It's like mouse fur. I mean, and it's got a shimmer to it that's beautiful. It takes the dye beautifully. They are twice the price of the 8 mummy habotai or China silk. So, but that's, I haven't experimented with a lot with jacquard weaves or anything like that. I've stayed pretty simple. So, anybody else?
Where do you,
Nope.
what about sources?
Sources, yes, I need to mention that. I need to do a shout out to the people that I buy from. Dharma Trading in California, I've been buying, they've been in business since 1960 something. And I've been buying dye and silk from them forever. And they are a very reliable source. They have great people there that know a lot about their products as well. I buy, the dyes that I use are made by DuPont and not the DuPont chemical company that we know here in the United States. It's a French company that has been making dyes since the late 1800s. And the first dyes that Mr. DuPont made were actually for the feathers for the cabaret dancers in Paris. And then the dyes, he expanded the dyes to clothes, it's for textiles. And so DuPont is a very well-known name, and they are pretty much strictly silk dyes. They have a couple of different products, but well-known and widely used in the silk community. Another brand is Jacquard brand dyes. They take a little bit less steam time, and they have a couple of different products. They have silk paints as well, but I don't use silk paint. I use the dye. And there's another company that I use called, a couple, Pro Chemical, which is in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I get things like the resist and soy wax from them, and other additives, things like thickeners that I might use for dye, for painting. They are a wonderful source too, and very knowledgeable about all things dyeing. If you ever have a question, they're terrific. And another one I've just started recently using is Atelier de Paris, which is run by one woman. She's a one-woman show, but I found that I can get larger quantity of dye. Instead of the small bottles, I can get liter bottles from her that Dharma doesn't carry, or it's a special order. So, so that's kind of nice. But they're all in California except for Pro Chemical, so it takes forever to get stuff. Those are my sources.
I have one more question. What about, do you have to wear gloves, or is there a toxicity to the dyes, or?
That is the wonderful thing about this, this stuff. It is non-toxic. I mean, you could probably drink the dye and not get sick. I don't wear, the only time I wear gloves is when I do a scrunch dye and I'm dropping dye on the silk and, doing this with it, because I don't need to walk around with, pink, purple, blue hands. Although I like to do it because it's like, oh, I've done something. Look, see, I do something. but it is non-toxic. So I really, the only thing that creates any kind of a smell is the resist. And it has a funny chemically smell, but it's not toxic. So I don't worry about it. Nothing creates nasty fumes. So.
Can you say a few words about marketing? Because you have this great relationship with the Maine Coastal Botanical Gardens now, and people don't, that doesn't happen to everyone.
Well, thank you. I do have a couple of retail outlets. One that has been very faithful to me, which is a store called Archipelago, and it's run by the Island Institute in Rockland. It is a beautiful store, and it's all strictly one-of-a-kind Maine-made products. And I'm pretty sure I approached them. No, she approached me. Now I remember the phone call. And I've been selling through them for maybe 5 years. And they are consistent and wonderful, and they love anything that I send them. And I think I've only, I've said to them once, go through your stock and send me something that, send back things that aren't working. And we've only had to do that once. So very grateful for them. And I had, so I also have a new account with, as you said, the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, or Booth Bay, Maine. There's Booth Bay and then there's Booth Bay Harbor. You don't want to get them mixed up, but they're right next door to each other. And I asked her how she found me, and she said she had known about me for a while. And obviously, if she's a buyer for a gift shop, she's going to be looking for Maine-made products. And she Googled my name and came up with it, or I think she Googled Maine silk painter and came up with me. And so she contacted me. Another account I have is thanks to Leslie Knight, and who is here, I think. And she's a nurse at Maine Medical in Portland, and went to the boutique there and sang my praises. And so I'm about to start an order for them as well. And I just got contacted by another Instagram friend who has a part ownership in a co-op in Bar Harbor. And so, and that's a jury process. So I don't know if I'll be in that or not. I'm hoping I will, because I don't have a presence in that area. I started out, I'm part of a program, state-run program called Maine Made. And I'll show you these little stickers. It's going to be backwards for you. See these little stickers? I put those on each of my hang tags. And this is a marketing program that Maine came up with for their artisans of all kinds. I mean, whether you make soap or honey or silk or woodwork, whatever. And they have a phenomenal database website, and it's Maine Made. I don't know if it's .gov or I think it's .com, but in any case, it is a state funded project. And I have had a lot of people find me through that. In fact, for Christmas, I had a woman from Houston, Texas contact me, and she wanted 2 scarves made. And I asked her how she found me, and she said, we summer in Kennebunkport. And then I wanted something from Maine. And so I looked on the Maine Made site and I found you. And she said, and by the way, I want one of your scarves, and I'm going to tell my husband about it. So maybe he'll contact you. And he did. And they're an older couple, and he was not web savvy. And so he emailed me, and he said, he was very formal. He was a lawyer. He said, Ms. Sullivan, I'm the husband. And my wife told me that she wants this particular scarf. Can you help me get it? And so I wrote back, and I tried to keep my little formal letter tone. And we ended up having quite a nice little email relationship. And so everybody in the family, the 2 daughters and the wife, got Maine Made scarves for Christmas. And that was kind of fun. So marketing, I have taken out ads, but print ads these days, I don't recommend spending money on them. I am on Facebook. I have my own silk page on Facebook, not my personal page. And I also have a page on Instagram. And really that's how I market myself. And that's how people find me. So it seems to have worked. And then word of mouth, of course, and sometimes beating the bushes, going to stores and saying, here's my work, are you interested? So that's my marketing plan. Not very sophisticated, but it works.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Do we have any other questions? No? Well,
I want to just shout out and say hi to my friends that are on here that have supported me. Ann Potter, Paige Bacon, hi Paige, and Carrie, and Peter and Leslie, all friends, and the other people that are here and that I don't know but are here supporting me. I really appreciate it. And my daughter Lindsay, who was, who said when I told her about this, she said, it's about time the world knew about your artwork, Mom. So thanks, Linz. So anyway, I have to thank you for this opportunity too, because it's really helped me put my thoughts in order about what I do and how I do it. And it just so happens that I'm going to be interviewed next month for the Maine Women's Magazine. So this has helped me kind of organize myself, I guess, in my head about what I do. So I'll be able to speak with confidence and clarity about myself when I'm interviewed. So thank you for that.
Well, the Fiber Arts Museum of the Eastern Shore, where Carol hails from at one time, is so thankful. Thank you, Lynn. I'm thinking of Lindsay. Thank you, Carol, for all of this. As somebody who's picked acres of blueberries, yes, they're perfect. They're not ready to pick yet. They're getting there. Thank you so much. I learned so much, and I've seen this multiple times. I learned stuff every single time I see you. Your work is phenomenal.
Oh, great.
Thank you to everyone that showed up here. You're helping to support Faces. All of your entrance fees goes to support Faces. Carol has donated her time to do this, and we thank her so much for doing that.
Oh, wonderful. It's been a pleasure.
It was great.
Good. Well, I hope you all walk
Right.
away with some new information.
Thank you.
New appreciation. So
Thanks, Carol.
you're welcome. Thank you. See ya.
Good to see you moving
Yeah.
instead of a still.
Right.
you.
Right. Oh, good to see you, Paige. Take care.
You too. Thanks.
All righty.
Good to see you, Catherine.
Hi, Linz.
Lindsay,
Hi,
I
Lynn.
saw you when you were this big, little. It was a long time ago.
Now she has
I
little-
remember. I kept looking at your face saying, I know this woman.
I haven't changed in 40 years or 30 years.
Not a
It was
Well,
when
maybe.
you said blueberries that it all came back into place. So
Oh, there you go.
or asparagus,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
we've got another
Lots
little
of us.
redhead here.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
This is-
goodness. Is this a grandchild, Carol?
Yeah, this is number 2.
Oh my goodness.
That's Buck. That is
My
Buck,
cutie.
Buck Wild Hornet.
Having a little applesauce and Cheerios watching Nano.
Oh, good.
You were fabulous,
That's
Mom.
wonderful.
Oh, thank you, sweetie. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Nice
Wasn't she
job.
good?
Yeah, you were
She was
great.
great.
You were really, really great.
Wow. And Lindsay, I take that as high compliments, not just because I know you're saying that, but you have been on 400 million Zoom meetings in your career. And you know about presentation and talking and so forth. So I take that with the sincerest appreciation.
You did, yeah, you were really engaging and your pace was great. I mean, you hit all the marks. So
Oh, good.
bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I could stop recording.
It was great.
Pause, stop recording.